Tonight, we are not opening the Bible. Not yet. Tonight, we are opening the budget. The United States federal budget. The Congressional Budget Office report. The line items your tax dollars funded last week while you were sleeping, while you were praying, while you were working double shifts to keep the lights on. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will never look at your paycheck the same way again. Here is the number that changed everything for me. $11.3 billion. That is what America spent in 6 days. 6 days. Bombing the land of Elam. The exact region the prophet Jeremiah called out by name 2,600 years ago. 6 days. $11.3 billion in precision-guided missiles, stealth bomber fuel, naval operations, drone surveillance, satellite coordination, and classified weapon systems, all aimed at the ground, where Daniel received his vision and Esther saved her people. Now hold that number in one hand. Pick up this number with the other. $12 billion. That is the entire annual budget for Head Start, the federal program that educates the poorest children in this country, the program that feeds 3-year-olds breakfast, the program that teaches 4-year-olds their letters, the program that gives single mothers one safe place to leave their children while they work. 6 days of bombs cost the same as a full year of educating your children. Let that sink in. Did you catch that? 6 days versus 365 days. Missiles versus milk. Warheads versus workbooks. And nobody on the news is making this comparison. Nobody in Congress stood up and said, "Wait, we just spent a year of children's education in less than a week of explosions." But somebody did say it. Somebody said it 3,000 years ago. Moses said it. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 33. The fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up. This is not politics. This is prophecy. This is not left versus right. This is Deuteronomy 28 versus Isaiah 60. And tonight, I am going to show you that the federal budget is a prophetic document, not because politicians wrote it with scripture in mind, but because the pattern of extraction it reveals, where your money goes and where it does not go, maps exactly onto a curse Moses prophesied. And the reversal of that extraction, happening right now through the Strait of Hormuz disruption, maps exactly onto a promise Isaiah recorded. The budget is the prophecy, the receipts are the evidence, and you, sitting right where you are living inside the fulfillment. Stay with me, this changes everything. Now let me show you the receipts. Not opinion, not commentary, not talking points from cable news. I am going to read you the actual numbers. Congressional Budget Office numbers, Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers, Federal Reserve numbers, government numbers, their own data. And then I am going to show you the scripture that prophesied those numbers 3,000 years before the first spreadsheet was ever invented. The Congressional Budget Office published its preliminary cost assessment for Operation Epic Fury, the military campaign against Iran that began on February 28, 2026. In the first 6 days of operations, the United States spent approximately $11.3 billion. That is not an estimate from a think tank. That is not speculation from a podcast. That is the government's own accounting of what it cost to launch over 5,500 precision strikes inside the borders of Iran. $11.3 billion in 6 days. Now let me break that down so you can feel it. That is roughly $1.9 billion per day. $78 million per hour. $1.3 million per minute. Every 60 seconds, while you slept, while you fed your children, while you drove to work in the dark, 1.3 million of your collective tax dollars evaporated into the sky over the land of Elam. But it gets deeper. The projected cost for the full quarter, if operations continue at this pace, is somewhere between $40 and $60 billion. $40 to $60 billion in 90 days. Your money, your labor, your fruit. Now pick up the other side of the receipt. Head Start, the federal early childhood education program, receives $12 billion per year. Not per quarter, per year. 365 days of feeding, teaching, and caring for nearly 1 million of the poorest children in America. And it costs barely more than what we burned through in less than a week over Iran. But wait, I am not done. Let me stack the receipts so high they block out the sun. The National School Lunch Program feeds 29 million children every day. Children who would otherwise sit through class with empty stomachs and distracted minds. Its annual budget, $14.2 billion. That is roughly 7.5 days of bombing Iran. 7.5 days of missiles buys a full year of feeding 29 million hungry children. But which one sailed through Congress without debate? Community health centers, the primary source of medical care for 30 million Americans, most of them in black and brown neighborhoods, most of them uninsured or underinsured, receive $6.4 billion per year. That is 3.4 days of bombing. 3 days and some change. The entire national network of community health care, the clinics your grandmother relies on, the centers where uninsured mothers get prenatal care, the places where people in your neighborhood go because the hospital closed. All of it costs less than a long weekend of airstrikes. Title I, Funding for High Poverty Schools, $18.4 billion per year. These are the schools your children attend, the ones with 30-year-old textbooks and leaking roofs, and teachers who buy supplies out of their own pockets. $18.4 billion sounds like a lot, until you realize it is roughly the same as what we will spend in 10 days of bombing the land of Elam. 10 days of precision strikes on ancient Persia costs the same as a full year of educating the poorest children in the richest country on earth. And here is the receipt nobody talks about. Historically, black colleges and universities, HBCUs, receive approximately $5.8 billion in total federal funding. The institutions that educated Martin Luther King Jr., Thurgood Marshall, Toni Morrison, and Katherine Johnson. The institutions that produce 70% of black dentists and 50% of black engineers. $5.8 billion. That is 3 days of bombing. 3 days. The entire federal investment in every HBCU in America, over 100 institutions, over 250,000 students, costs less than a long weekend over Iran. Your schools are crumbling. Your hospitals are closing. Your neighborhoods are food deserts. Your HBCUs are running on fumes. And your tax dollars, the fruit of your labor, the sweat of your double shifts, the overtime you never get to enjoy, are being airdropped onto ancient Elam at a rate of $1.3 million per minute. Now let me show you what this looks like in your household. The Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes unemployment data every month. As of the most recent report, black unemployment stands at 7.2%. White unemployment stands at 3.7%. That is not a gap. That is a canyon. Nearly double. Your family is twice as likely to have someone sitting at the kitchen table filling out applications, while the bombs fall on somebody else's ancient prophecy. The Federal Reserve publishes wealth data. The median wealth of a white family in America, $188,000. The median wealth of a black family, $36,000. The gap between them, $154,000. That gap is not an accident. That gap is a receipt. That is generations of labor extracted, redirected, invested elsewhere, compounded for someone else. And here is where it meets you at the gas pump. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which 20% of the world's oil supply flows, has been disrupted since March 3rd. Oil prices have surged between 13 and 16% in less than 2 weeks. And who feels that surge first? Not the executives, not the hedge fund managers, not the defense contractors whose stock just jumped 18%. You feel it. You feel it at the gas pump on Monday morning. You feel it in the grocery bill on Friday evening. You feel it in the heating bill that arrives right when you thought you were catching up. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the lowest income households in America, disproportionately black households, spend nearly 8% of their total income on energy. The wealthiest households spend less than 3%. When oil surges 16%, the poor take a body blow. The rich take a rounding error. That is not economics. That is Deuteronomy 28, verse 33. The fruit of your labor, the gas you burn driving to work, the groceries you buy to feed your family, the rent you pay to keep a roof over your children, is being consumed by a system whose wars, whose priorities, whose trillion-dollar weapons programs were never designed for you. They were designed to protect something. But that something was never your neighborhood. That something was never your school. That something was never your family. Think about that. And now open your Bible. Open your Bible to Deuteronomy chapter 28. Now, most churches teach Deuteronomy 28 as a list of blessings and curses. They read the first 14 verses, the blessings, and they stop. They tell you that if you obey God, you will be blessed above all peoples. The head and not the tail. Above and not beneath. And that is true. That is real. That is in the text. But they skip what comes after verse 14. They skip it because what comes after verse 14 is not comfortable. It is not a prosperity sermon. It is not something you can put on a coffee mug or a t-shirt. What comes after verse 14 is a forensic autopsy of empire. It is Moses standing at the edge of the promised land, looking forward through time, and describing with surgical precision what would happen to his people if they lost their covenant consciousness. And when you read it, when you really read it, you will see your paycheck. You will see your tax return. You will see your grocery bill. You will see your children's underfunded school. You will see the federal budget. Let me read it to you. Verse 33. The fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always. Stop right there. The fruit of thy land. In Hebrew, the word for labors here is yaga. It does not mean casual work. It does not mean hobby. It does not mean side hustle. Yaga means exhausting toil, the kind of work that breaks your body, that bends your back, that drains your life force. It is the word used to describe the labor of slaves in Egypt who mixed straw into bricks under a burning sun. It is the word that carries the sweat of generations who built wealth they were never allowed to keep. But there is a second layer to yaga that scholars rarely discuss. The word does not just describe exhaustion. It describes exhaustion that produces value. Yaga is productive suffering. It is labor that creates something measurable: grain, infrastructure, capital, revenue. The people are not idle. They are not unemployed. They are working. They are producing. The economy is growing because of them. But the growth flows in one direction, away from the workers and toward the system that owns the output. That is the cruelty of Deuteronomy 28, verse 33. It is not about poverty through idleness. It is about poverty through productive labor. You work and produce, and someone else consumes the product. You generate wealth, and the wealth is redirected. You are the engine of the economy, but you never ride in the car you are powering. Look at the data. The Economic Policy Institute calculates that black workers in America generate approximately $2.4 trillion in annual economic output. $2.4 trillion. That is larger than the entire GDP of most nations on Earth. But the median black household holds $36,000 in wealth. The engine is running at $2.4 trillion. The tank is holding $36,000. Where did the rest go? Deuteronomy 28 knows, a nation which thou knowest not ate it up, the fruit of thy land, and all thy yaga, all your exhausting, body-breaking, soul-draining, wealth-producing labor, shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, a nation which thou knowest not. Think about that phrase, a nation you do not know. Not a nation you chose, not a nation you designed, not a nation whose wars reflect your interests, a nation whose budget reveals where you stand, and where you stand is at the bottom of every priority list. You live inside its borders. You pay into its systems. You fund its military campaigns with every paycheck. But it doesn't know you. Your neighborhoods are food deserts. Your schools are underfunded. Your hospitals are closing. Your children are the last line item on every appropriations bill. You labor, they eat. That is not a political observation. That is Deuteronomy 28, verse 33. Written 3,000 years before the Congressional Budget Office existed. But it gets deeper. Go down to verse 43. Moses said, "The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low." The stranger rises. You go beneath. Now overlay that on the Federal Reserve data. Median white family wealth, $188,000. Median black family wealth, $36,000. The gap between them, $154,000. That is not a metaphor. That is 5 generations of compounded extraction. 5 generations of labor flowing out and never flowing back. Redlining drew the map. The GI Bill drew the line. Housing covenants built the walls. Lending discrimination locked the doors. And the wealth gap you see in the Federal Reserve Report is the receipt, the documented, audited, government-certified receipt of Deuteronomy 28, verse 43, executing across centuries. Verse 44. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. The lending data, the home ownership gap, the credit score disparities, the payday loan industry that plants its flags in black neighborhoods, the way colonizers planted flags on African soil, extracting, always extracting, calling it service while it devours. Banks close branches in your zip code. Payday lenders opened 3 more. The interest rates they charge would make Pharaoh blush, and every dollar of interest that flows from your community into their ledger is another line of Deuteronomy 28 executing in real time. You are not reading ancient poetry. You are reading your bank statement. You are reading the IRS report on where your taxes went last quarter. You are reading a prophetic receipt, written by Moses, confirmed by the Congressional Budget Office, and stamped with the blood of Elam's displaced children. Now here is what most preachers miss entirely. They read Deuteronomy 28 and they say, "This is a curse." And it is, but it is not the end of the story. Deuteronomy 28 is the diagnosis. It is the X-ray. It is the blood test. It shows you exactly what the disease looks like in your financial system, where the infection entered, how it spread, what organs it attacked. But God never gives a diagnosis without a prescription. God never shows you the disease without showing you the cure, never shows you the wound without showing you the balm. And the cure is coming. The balm is being mixed right now. We will get there tonight. But first, you need to see the pattern. Because this extraction, this consuming of the fruit, is not unique to America. It is as old as the first pyramid. It is as systematic as Babylon's treasury. And it always, hear me, it always ends the same way. God shakes the empire, and he redirects the wealth, every single time. Let me take you back to the beginning of the pattern. Because what is happening right now, this extraction of your labor to fund wars on the land of Elam, is not the first time God's people have built empires for someone else. The pattern is ancient, and it is exact. Start in Egypt. Exodus chapter 1, verse 11. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters, to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. Read that carefully. The Hebrews built treasure cities, not their own cities. Not cities where their children would live and prosper and grow old in peace. Treasure cities, storage facilities for Pharaoh's grain, Pharaoh's gold, Pharaoh's weapons. The sweat off their backs filled vaults they would never open. The bricks they mixed from straw and mud became walls they would never live behind. The infrastructure they created with broken hands and bent spines served one purpose: to make Pharaoh richer, to make Pharaoh more powerful, to make Pharaoh's empire the most magnificent thing the ancient world had ever seen. And the builders? The builders lived in Goshen. The builders lived in poverty. The builders had nothing to show for their centuries of labor except scars on their backs and calluses on their hands. The fruit of their labor fed a nation they didn't know. Deuteronomy 28, verse 33. In Egypt. Now move the timeline forward 500 years. Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem in 586 BC and deported the best and brightest of Judah to serve his empire. Daniel chapter 1 tells you exactly what happened. Nebuchadnezzar took the young men of the royal seed, the nobles, the intelligent, the gifted. He took the cream of the covenant people and put them to work. Daniel himself, one of the greatest prophetic minds in human history, spent his career serving a pagan king's administration. Think about that. The man who received visions from the throne of God spent his days interpreting dreams for Babylon's CEO. His intellectual labor, his prophetic genius, his God-given insight, all of it served an empire that worshipped golden statues and threw dissenters into furnaces. Daniel prospered individually, but his nation was captive. His people's collective genius was being extracted to build Babylon's infrastructure, to manage Babylon's provinces, to stabilize Babylon's government. The best minds of the covenant people, building someone else's empire, the fruit of their intellectual labor, consumed by a nation that did not honor their God or remember their covenant. Deuteronomy 28, verse 33. In Babylon. Move the timeline again. Persia. After Babylon fell, the Persian Empire absorbed the Jewish exiles. And here is what most people miss about the Book of Esther. It is not just a story about a brave queen. It is a story about economic extraction. Esther's people were citizens of an empire that taxed them, conscripted them, and used their resources to fund wars they did not choose. When Haman proposed his genocide in Esther chapter 3, what did he offer the king? 10,000 talents of silver. Where do you think that silver was going to come from? From the confiscated wealth of the Jewish communities scattered across 127 provinces. Their accumulated labor, their homes, their businesses, their savings would have been devoured by a man they had never met, funding an agenda they had never agreed to. Think about the calculation Haman made. He did not propose genocide out of pure hatred alone. He proposed it as an economic transaction. He told the king, destroying these people is profitable. Their wealth can fund the empire. Their properties can fill the treasury. Their generations of accumulated labor can be confiscated in a single decree. Haman understood that extraction is most efficient when the source is eliminated entirely. The same logic operated in the confiscation of black property during racial pogroms. Tulsa, 1921. Rosewood, 1923. Wilmington, 1898. Destroy the community. Confiscate the property. Call it justice. But God reversed it. Purim, the celebration that follows, is not just about survival. It is about reversal. Esther 9, verse 1 says something extraordinary. It was turned to the contrary. The Hebrew word there is nahafok, from the same root as hapak. Turned, flipped, reversed. Everything that was designed to extract, destroy, and consume was turned upside down. The very gallows Haman built for Mordecai became the gallows Haman hung from. The decree that authorized extraction became the authorization for defense. Remember that word. Hapak, nahafok, reversal. We are going to need it later tonight. Now, bring the pattern home. America. The transatlantic slave trade brought millions of African people to a continent where their labor built the most powerful economy in the history of civilization. Cotton did not pick itself. Tobacco did not harvest itself. The railroads were not laid by ghosts. The wealth of the American South, and by extension, the financial infrastructure of the American North, was constructed on the broken backs of covenant people who were never compensated. And after slavery ended, did the extraction stop? Did the fruit start flowing back? Sharecropping. You worked the land. The landowner took the harvest. You went into debt. The landowner went to the bank. A new name for the same pattern. The fruit of thy labor, consumed by a nation whose economy was designed to ensure you never accumulated enough to break free. Then Jim Crow. Then redlining. Then the GI Bill that sent white veterans to college and left black veterans standing at the door. Then the war on drugs that filled prisons with black bodies while the drugs flowed freely through suburbs. Then predatory lending that turned the dream of homeownership into the nightmare of foreclosure. From Egypt to Babylon to Persia, to the plantation to the prison, the pattern never changes. The names change. The mechanisms change. The spreadsheets get more sophisticated. But the fundamental equation remains. Your labor goes in, their empire goes up, and you stay at the bottom of the budget. Deuteronomy 28, verse 33. Executing across 4,000 years of history. But here is what every empire forgets. The pattern has a second half. Egypt extracted. God sent plagues and drowned Pharaoh's army. Babylon extracted. God sent Cyrus and the empire crumbled. Persia extracted. God sent Esther and the decree was reversed. Every empire that consumed the fruit of the covenant, people reached a point where God said, enough. And right now, with the Strait of Hormuz disrupted, with oil prices surging, with the land of Elam shaking under the weight of prophecy, we are approaching that point again. The extraction has a timer, and the timer is running out. Now here is where the budget meets the Bible in a way that will shake you. I showed you the numbers. $11.3 billion in 6 days, bombing the land of Elam. I showed you Deuteronomy 28, where Moses prophesied that the fruit of your labor would be consumed by a nation you do not know. I showed you the pattern: Egypt, Babylon, Persia, America, 4 empires, same equation. Now I need to show you why the land your tax dollars are bombing matters, because it is not random. The $11.3 billion was not aimed at just any piece of desert. It was aimed at the exact territory a prophet named and described 2,600 years ago. Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 35. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. Elam, that is the biblical name for the region that is modern-day southwestern Iran, the province of Khuzestan, where Iran's nuclear facilities sit, where its military infrastructure is concentrated, where the bombs are falling right now as you watch this video. God said he would break the bow of Elam. The bow was the signature weapon of the Elamite warriors. Their archers were feared across the ancient world. To break the bow is to break the military capability, to dismantle the primary instrument of power. That is what Operation Epic Fury is doing. Precision strikes on missile silos, nuclear centrifuge halls, drone manufacturing facilities, radar installations, command centers. The bow of Elam, updated to 21st century military hardware, is being broken. And your tax dollars are funding it. Verse 36, "And upon Elam will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven." 4 winds from 4 quarters. A coalition. Multiple directions. The current military operation involves strikes from naval positions in the Persian Gulf, aircraft carrier battle groups positioned south of Iran, air operations from bases in Qatar and Bahrain to the southwest, drone surveillance from assets in Iraq to the west, intelligence coordination with allies in the Caucasus and Central Asia to the north and east, B-2 stealth bombers flying from Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, cyber operations disrupting Iran's command infrastructure from locations classified above your clearance level and mine. 4 winds, 4 quarters. Jeremiah did not just predict that judgment would come to Elam. He predicted the geometry of the judgment, that it would come from every direction simultaneously. A multi-vector, multi-domain military operation coordinated across land, sea, air, and cyberspace. The prophet saw the formation of a multinational military coalition 2,600 years before the first aircraft carrier was commissioned. He described combined arms warfare before the concept existed. Now connect the two prophecies. Deuteronomy 28, verse 33, says the fruit of your labor, your tax dollars, will be consumed by a system whose priorities are not yours. Jeremiah 49 says that system will direct its consuming power toward Elam, breaking its bow with forces from 4 quarters. These are not 2 separate prophecies. They are one prophetic circuit. The extraction prophecy and the Elam prophecy are connected through your paycheck. The money Moses said would be taken from you is the same money Jeremiah said would fall on the land of Elam. Your budget line item is the wiring that connects Deuteronomy to Jeremiah. Your W-2 is the bridge between 2 books of the Bible that most scholars study in isolation. But here is what makes this extraordinary. Jeremiah did not stop at judgment. He never does. The God of Israel does not prophesy destruction without also prophesying what comes after the rubble stops smoking. Verse 39, "But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord." God promised to restore Elam after the breaking, after the 4 winds, after the bow is shattered and the might is dismantled. God promised restoration. God does not leave nations in permanent ruin. He judges, he refines, and then he rebuilds. So if God promised judgment and restoration for Elam, what does he promise for the people whose labor funded the judgment? What does he promise for the people who paid $11.3 billion in 6 days, while their own Children's Head Start program begged for $12 billion per year? The answer is in Deuteronomy 30. Open your Bible 2 chapters forward. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 3. "Then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity, and have compassion upon thee, and will return, and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee." The same God who diagnosed the extraction in chapter 28 prescribed the reversal in chapter 30. The same God who said, "A nation you do not know will eat your fruit," also said, "I will turn your captivity." The Hebrew word for turn here is shav. It means to reverse direction, to bring back, to restore what was taken. And verse 5, "And the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it. And he will do thee good, and multiply thee above thy fathers." Multiply you above your fathers. Not back to zero, not back to baseline. Above, greater than what was taken, more than what was lost. The restoration does not merely undo the extraction, it exceeds the original state. But I need you to hear this clearly. The extraction had to happen first. The judgment on Elam had to happen first. The breaking of the bow had to happen first. The disruption had to happen first. Because the reversal, the turning of captivity, the multiplication, the restoration, comes out of the shaking. You cannot have Deuteronomy 30 without Deuteronomy 28. You cannot have restoration without the diagnosis. The pain you are feeling at the gas pump, the anger you feel looking at the budget numbers, the righteous frustration of watching your tax dollars fund someone else's war while your children's school loses another teacher. That is random suffering. That is the labor pain of a reversal being born. And now, I need to show you the word that makes it all click. One Hebrew word, 7 letters. And it will change how you see everything that is happening in the world right now. The word is hapak. Say it with me. Hapak. H-A-P-A-K. In Hebrew, hapak means to turn over, to flip, to reverse direction completely, to convert one thing into its opposite. It is not a gentle nudge. It is not an adjustment. It is not reform. Hapak is a total inversion. What was up goes down. What was down goes up. What flowed out begins to flow in. What was taken starts to return. And when you find this word in Isaiah 60 verse 5, everything changes. Isaiah 60 verse 5. "Then thou shalt see, and flow together, and thine heart shall fear, and be enlarged. Because the abundance of the sea shall be converted unto thee. The forces of the Gentiles shall come unto thee. The abundance of the sea shall be converted unto thee." That word, converted, H-A-P-A-K, reversed, flipped, turned upside down. The wealth of the sea, the commercial power of global trade, the oil tankers, the shipping lanes, the trillions of dollars that move across oceans, shall be hapak unto thee, redirected, reversed, turned from flowing away from you to flowing toward you. This is not a metaphor, this is a mechanism, and it is the same root word that appears in Esther, chapter 9, verse 1, where the text says, "It was turned to the contrary." Nana hafoshu, from hapak. The very day that was designed for the destruction of God's people was turned, flipped. What was meant to be a day of genocide became a day of victory. What was meant to be extraction became empowerment. The enemy's gallows became the enemy's execution platform. Hapak runs through the entire Bible as God's signature move. He does not just defeat enemies, he reverses the weapon. He does not just protect his people. He takes the very instrument designed to destroy them and turns it into the instrument of their elevation. And right now, you are watching hapak execute in the global economy. Stay with me. The Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil supply flows through this narrow waterway between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Every day, roughly 16 to 17 million barrels of crude oil pass through those waters. It is the most important choke point in global energy. It is the beating heart of the world's petroleum economy. Since March 3, 2026, that choke point has been disrupted. The military operations in Iran have destabilized the entire region. Iran's naval forces attempted to close the strait. International shipping has been rerouted. Insurance premiums for tankers have skyrocketed. Oil prices have surged between 13 and 16% in less than 2 weeks. Let me put dimensions on this disruption so you understand the scale of what is happening. Before the conflict, approximately 16 to 17 million barrels of crude oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. At current market prices, that is roughly $1.3 billion worth of petroleum flowing through a waterway narrower than the distance between Manhattan and New Jersey every 24 hours. When that flow is disrupted, the entire global energy market convulses. Supply contracts trigger penalty clauses. Refineries in Europe scramble for alternative sources. Shipping companies reroute tankers around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 3 weeks to delivery times and billions in fuel costs. The ripple effect reaches every gas station in your neighborhood. It reaches the trucking companies that deliver your groceries. It reaches the airlines that raise your ticket prices. It reaches the utility companies that adjust your heating bill. One narrow waterway in the Persian Gulf, in the land of Elam, disrupts the economic life of every black household in America. The wealth of the sea is in chaos. And where is it being redirected? Africa. Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer, has seen a 14% increase in crude oil exports since the Hormuz disruption began. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company reported emergency purchase agreements with 3 European refineries that previously sourced exclusively from the Gulf. Angola, the continent's second-largest producer, has received emergency purchase orders from European refineries desperate for alternative supply. Ghana's offshore fields in the Jubilee Basin are operating at maximum capacity for the first time in 3 years. Even smaller producers, Senegal, which just began offshore production in 2025, and Uganda, with its Lake Albert Basin, are fielding inquiries they never expected this soon. But it is bigger than individual nations. The African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, is a trade agreement covering 54 African nations, 1.4 billion people, and a combined GDP exceeding $3 trillion. It is the largest free trade area in the world by member states. And the Hormuz disruption has done what decades of diplomatic efforts could not. It has made Africa's oil strategically essential to European and Asian energy security overnight. The wealth of the sea is being converted. Hapak. Now connect this to Psalm 68, verse 31. Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. Ethiopia, representing the African continent in prophetic shorthand, stretching out her hands, not begging, stretching, reaching, receiving. The posture of someone catching what God is throwing toward them. The wealth that flowed away from the African continent for 5 centuries, through the slave trade, through colonialism, through resource extraction, through structural adjustment programs, through every mechanism the global system used to keep Africa's wealth flowing outward, is now beginning to reverse direction. Hey, Pak, and you, sitting in your living room, feeling the gas prices at the pump, wondering why everything costs more, frustrated by a system that takes and never gives back. You are feeling the labor pain of the reversal. The discomfort you feel right now is not random suffering. It is the friction created when a 500-year flow begins to change direction. Rivers do not reverse without turbulence. Tides do not turn without waves. Economies do not flip without disruption. The disruption is the reversal. The pain at the pump is the hapak. Isaiah 60 did not promise that the reversal would be comfortable. It promised that the wealth of the sea would be converted. And conversion is never painless. Ask anyone who has been converted. The old dies so the new can live. The old flow stops so the new flow can begin. The old system shakes so the covenant system can rise. Look at what is happening in the world right now. Oil rerouting through Africa. BRICS nations, including Egypt, Ethiopia, and Iran, forming alternative economic alliances. The dollar's global dominance being questioned for the first time in 80 years. The wealth of the sea is not just shifting, it is being hapak, flipped, reversed, turned to the contrary. And Isaiah says, "This wealth shall be converted unto thee, not unto the system that extracted from you, not unto the empire that consumed your fruit, unto thee, unto the covenant people, unto the remnant who survived Egypt, Babylon, Persia, the plantation, Jim Crow, redlining, mass incarceration, and every weapon ever forged against them." The extraction is Deuteronomy 28. The reversal is Isaiah 60. And you are living in the space between them. So if the extraction is Deuteronomy 28 and the reversal is Isaiah 60, what are you supposed to do right now? How do you live in the space between the diagnosis and the cure? How do you stand up when the system is still extracting, but the reversal has already begun? The answer is in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 17. They which builded on the wall, and they that bore burdens, with those that laid it, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. One hand builds, one hand defends, both at the same time. That is the posture of covenant economics. Let me unpack this because it is more than a metaphor. Nehemiah was rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem after the exile. The city was in ruins. The people had returned from Babylon, from extraction, from captivity, from generational labor in someone else's empire. And they found their inheritance destroyed. Broken walls, burned gates, rubble where the temple once stood. Everything the previous generation had built was gone. Everything they had invested was consumed. Sound familiar? And when Nehemiah began to rebuild, the enemies showed up. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem. They mocked, they threatened, they conspired. They said, "What are these feeble people doing? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish which are burned?" Feeble. That is what they called the builders, feeble. And God's response was not to remove the enemies. God's response was not to make the building easy. God's response was, build with one hand and hold a weapon with the other. Now look at what is happening right now. The modern Sanballats are everywhere. DEI programs, the scaffolding that helped covenant people access institutional resources, are being dismantled. Executive orders are eliminating diversity positions across federal agencies. Contracts are being revoked. Scholarships are being challenged. Every piece of institutional scaffolding that was erected over the past 60 years is being pulled down, plank by plank. And Sanballat is laughing. What are these feeble people doing? But here is what Sanballat does not see. The National Women's Business Council reports that Black women are the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs in the United States. While Sanballat pulls down the scaffolding, the builders are building faster. While the DEI offices close, Black-owned businesses are opening. While the institutional support structures crumble, grassroots economic networks are forming. One hand builds, one hand defends. And the builders are not building for Pharaoh this time. They are not building treasure cities for someone else's empire. They are building for their own families, their own communities, their own covenant inheritance. That is the Nehemiah shift. That is the moment when the labor stops flowing out and starts flowing in. When the bricks are no longer for Pharaoh's storage, but for Jerusalem's wall. When the skills you developed in captivity become the tools you use in freedom. Now hear this from Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 8. Because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remaining of the people shall spoil thee. The system that spoiled, that plundered, that extracted, that consumed, will itself be spoiled by the remaining people. The remnant, the ones who survived, the ones who kept building even when the scaffolding was removed, the ones who held a weapon in one hand and a trowel in the other. This is not revenge. Do not hear what I'm not saying. This is covenant economics. God does not endorse retaliation. God does not bless bitterness. What God endorses is reversal, the same hapak we saw in Isaiah 60. The wealth that was extracted begins to return. The systems that consumed begin to crumble. The people who built for everyone else finally build for themselves. And there is a timer on this extraction. Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. 400 years. God put a number on it. The extraction was not going to last forever. It had a start date and an end date. God knew before the first brick was mixed in Egypt, before the first field was plowed in Goshen, before the first baby was thrown into the Nile. He knew exactly how many years the extraction would run, and he set a limit. That is the nature of the God we serve. He permits seasons of extraction. He allows the empire to consume the fruit for a measured period. But he has always, in every covenant, in every dispensation, in every era of Scripture, put a timer on the suffering. Egypt got 400 years. Babylon got 70. The timer is always exact, and when it runs out, it does not wind down gradually. It stops, and the reverse begins. Verse 14 adds the kicker. And also that nation, whom they shall serve, will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. Afterward, after the 400 years, after the extraction, after the consuming, they come out, and they come out with great substance, not empty-handed, not starting from zero, not with just freedom and nothing else, with great substance. The Hebrew word is gadol rekush, an enormous, overwhelming quantity of possessions and wealth. When the children of Israel left Egypt, they left with Egyptian gold, Egyptian silver, Egyptian clothing. The empire paid its own reparations. The extraction reversed. The 400 years was diagnosed before it began. The coming out was prophesied before the going in. The great substance was promised before the first brick was mixed. And if you trace the 400 years from 1619, the year the first enslaved Africans arrived at Point Comfort, Virginia, 400 years brings you to 2019. The timer expired. The prophetic clock hit zero. The extraction period that Genesis 15 defined reached its end. Everything that has happened since 2019, the pandemic that exposed the fault lines, the social uprising, the economic disruption, the Hormuz crisis, the wealth reversal beginning to move through African channels, is the afterward. You are living in the afterward. You are inside the great substance. It has not fully materialized yet, but the mechanism is running. The river is turning. The hapak is in motion. And so the question becomes, what do you do in the afterward? How do you position yourself inside the reversal instead of still standing inside the extraction flow? That is what we cover next. 7 specific actions. Not theory, not sermons, not motivational fluff. Concrete, measurable, prophetically aligned economic actions that you can start this week. Here are the 7 actions of prophetic economics. Write these down. Screenshot them. Save this moment. Because what I am about to give you is not motivation. It is positioning. It is how you move your feet from the extraction flow to the reversal flow. It is how you align your daily economic behavior with what God is doing in the earth right now. Action number 1. Support Black-owned businesses with intention. This is the most basic act of hapak available to you. Every dollar you redirect from a system that extracts to a business that reinvests in your community is an act of reversal. It is economic Purim, taking what was designed to flow outward and turning it inward. And I'm not talking about performative buying. I'm not talking about one-day-a-year hashtag campaigns. I'm talking about structural redirection. Find 3 Black-owned businesses that sell products or services you already buy: groceries, hair care, clothing, insurance, banking, and make the switch permanent. Not for a month, not for a season. Permanent. Because Pharaoh's treasure cities were not built by one day of labor. They were built by permanent, structural extraction. And the reversal requires the same permanence. It requires you to rewire where your money goes. Not once, but forever. Action number 2, explore cooperative economics. There is a model in the Basque region of Spain called the Mondragon Corporation. It is a federation of worker cooperatives, over 70,000 workers who own the businesses they work in. They started in 1956 with 5 people and a priest. Today they generate over 12 billion euros in annual revenue. The workers own the means. The profits stay in the community. The wealth is not extracted. It is circulated. And this is not a foreign concept to Black America. Before it was destroyed on June 1st, 1921, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Black Wall Street, operated on cooperative economics. The dollar circulated within the community an estimated 36 to 100 times before it left. 36 times. That means a dollar spent at one Black-owned business became wages at another, became rent at another, became groceries at another, became savings at another. The fruit of the labor stayed with the laborers. Research cooperatives. Look into credit unions instead of corporate banks. Explore community land trusts. This is not utopian dreaming. This is Nehemiah building the wall. Action number 3. Build emergency reserves. Proverbs 21, verse 20. There is treasure to be desired, and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man spendeth it up. The wise have reserves. They have oil in their dwelling. That is not metaphorical. That is economic preparedness. 3 to 6 months of expenses saved in an account that Sanballat cannot touch. Start with $500. Then build to $1,000. Then build to 1 month's rent. Then keep building until you have a wall between your family and the next disruption. Because here is the truth. When oil prices surge 16%, the family without reserves goes into debt. The family with reserves adjusts. The difference between surviving the Hormuz disruption and being destroyed by it is a savings account. Action number 4. Redirect spending toward community institutions. Where does your tithe go? Where does your charitable giving flow? Are you funding institutions that reinvest in your community, or institutions that build treasure cities for someone else? This is not about which church is right or wrong. This is about tracing your dollar the same way we trace the federal budget. Does your dollar come back to your neighborhood? Does it fund the schools your children attend? Does it build the healthcare center your grandmother needs? If the answer is no, then your private budget is replicating the federal one. Extraction without return. Redirect. Even 10% of your discretionary spending toward community-based organizations, mutual aid funds, community development financial institutions, local scholarship programs, creates a microcurrent of hapak in your own household. Action number 5. Connect with the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is the one most people miss entirely. The AFCFTA is not a distant policy document. It is the largest free trade area in the world by member states. 54 nations, 1.4 billion people, $3 trillion in GDP. And the Hormuz disruption has accelerated its significance by a decade. African oil, African minerals, African agricultural products are becoming strategically essential to the global economy in ways that were theoretical 12 months ago and are now urgent. If you are an entrepreneur, research AFCFTA trade opportunities. If you are an investor, look at African infrastructure funds. If you are a student, study Swahili, study French, study the economies of Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Ethiopia. The prophecy of Psalm 68:31, Ethiopia stretching out her hands, is not a devotional verse. It is an investment thesis. The hands are stretching. The question is whether you are positioned to receive what they are offering. Action number 6. Invest in intergenerational wealth. Transfer. Proverbs 13, verse 22. A good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children. Not to his children, to his children's children. That is multi-generational thinking. And the system that extracted from you was designed to prevent exactly this. Redlining prevented property accumulation. Lending discrimination prevented capital formation. The wealth gap is not an accident. It is the result of centuries of deliberately breaking the covenant chain of inheritance. Start the chain again. Even small amounts, $50 a month into an investment account in your child's name, begins the process. Teach your children that inheritance is not just money. Inheritance is understanding. Inheritance is knowing where the pattern came from, knowing what Deuteronomy 28 diagnosed, knowing what Isaiah 60 promised, and building accordingly. Financial literacy is covenant consciousness applied to spreadsheets. Action number 7. Tithe your attention. This is the hardest one, and it may be the most important. Micah chapter 7, verse 8. Rejoice not against me, O mine enemy. When I fall, I shall arise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord shall be a light unto me. When I fall, I shall arise. Not might arise, not could arise. Shall arise. But you cannot arise while consuming the content of the system that pushed you down. You cannot arise while feeding your attention to algorithms designed to keep you distracted, confused, angry, and spending. Every hour of your attention consumed by entertainment that does not build you, news that does not inform you, drama that does not sharpen you, is a tithe paid to the extraction economy. Tithe your attention to building, to learning, to connecting, to studying, to praying, to strategizing. Stop consuming from the system that consumes you and start building the one that builds you. 7 actions. Not theory. Not a dream. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 17. One hand on the trowel, one hand on the weapon. Building while you defend. Moving while the ground shakes. Investing while the empire extracts. Because the extraction has a timer, and the timer expired in 2019. Everything you are building now is inside the afterword of Genesis 15, verse 14. Build accordingly. Let me tell you who you are. Because the system has been telling you a different story. The system has been telling you that you are an expense, a line item, a problem to be managed, a demographic to be pulled, a consumer to be targeted, a worker to be utilized, and a community to be contained. The budget they wrote tells the story they believe. $11.3 billion in 6 days for bombs. $12 billion in a year for your children. That ratio tells you exactly where you stand in their ledger. You are the bottom line. The afterthought. The funding that gets cut when the defense contractors need more. The program that gets debated while the weapons procurement sails through committee without a single dissenting vote. But that is their story. That is Deuteronomy 28. That is the diagnosis. Let me tell you God's story. Let me tell you the prescription. You are not a line item in their budget. You are not an expense they manage. You are not a demographic they target. You are not extraction. You are not Deuteronomy 28. You are covenant economy. You are Deuteronomy 30, the turned captivity. You are Isaiah 60, the hapak, the reversal, the wealth of the sea converted toward you. You are Nehemiah 4, the builder who works with one hand and fights with the other. You are Genesis 15, the seed of Abraham, who came out of affliction with great substance. You are Psalm 68, Ethiopia, stretching out her hands. Not begging, receiving. Your suffering was not your destiny. Let me say that again. Write it down. Put it on your mirror. Teach it to your children. Your suffering was not your destiny. Deuteronomy 28 was the diagnosis. It was the X-ray that showed you where the disease entered your economic bloodstream. Through extraction, through labor that built someone else's treasure cities, through a system that consumed the fruit and left you with the rind. But Deuteronomy 30 is your destiny. Restoration, reversal, multiplication above your fathers. The captivity turned, the scattered gathered, the consumed restored. And Isaiah 60 is your inheritance, the wealth of the sea, hapak, converted unto you, not trickled down, not redistributed by political will, converted by divine mechanism. The same God who parted the sea for Moses is rerouting the wealth through the sea for you. The extraction was the symptom. The reversal is the cure. And the reversal is happening now. If this opened your eyes, if you will never look at your paycheck, your tax return, or the federal budget the same way again, type prophetic economics in the comments. I need to see how many witnesses God assembled tonight. I need to know that you heard this. I need to know that you understand. The budget is not just accounting. The budget is prophecy. And your economic behavior is your response to that prophecy. Share this with someone who needs to see their budget through the lens of Deuteronomy 28. Share it with someone who is frustrated by the system. Let them see that the frustration is not random. It is prophetic, and the reversal is not distant. It is now. Subscribe, because next we are going to decode the Ezekiel 38 coalition that is forming right now in the Middle East, and what it means for every Black American who is paying attention. Tell me where you are watching from, because this awakening is not isolated. It is spreading. From city to city, from screen to screen, from living room to kitchen table to prayer closet. The people who were told they were the last line item are discovering they are the first covenant. And that changes everything. Now, before we go, I need you to pray this with me. Wherever you are, in your car, in your bed, standing in your kitchen with your phone in your hand, pray this with me right now. Father, we come before you tonight not as a line item, not as an expense, not as a statistic in a budget that was never designed for us. We come before you as covenant people, seed of Abraham, carriers of the promise, survivors of Egypt, Babylon, Persia, and every empire that tried to consume the fruit of our labor. You said in Deuteronomy 28, verse 33, that a nation we do not know would eat up our labors. We have lived inside that verse. We have felt its weight in every paycheck, every tax return, every underfunded school, every closed hospital, every dollar that flowed out and never came back. But you also said in Deuteronomy 30 that you would turn our captivity. You said in Isaiah 60 that the wealth of the sea would be hapak, reversed, converted, turned unto us. You said in Genesis 15 that afterward we would come out with great substance. We are living in the afterward. We receive the hapak tonight. We are not extraction. We are covenant. We are not the tail. We are the head. We are not beneath. We are above. We are not consumers. We are builders. We are not forgotten. We are remembered. And from this day forward, we build with one hand and we defend with the other. We redirect our dollars. We invest in our children. We connect with our continent. We tithe our attention to the work of restoration. The extraction is over. The reversal has begun. The covenant economy rises in the name that is above every name, above every budget, above every empire, above every system that ever thought it could consume the fruit of your chosen people and get away with it. Amen.